What is faith? What is belief? There are two possible perspectives I'm going to deal with right now. Popular ones. One is the whole idea of the leap of faith, quote unquote, the kind of blind belief where the mind must be disregarded. Then there's the other, more biblically rooted mindset of some who say that faith means you hear what God says, accept it as true, and act upon it. That's faith. Hear what God says, accept it as true, and then act upon it. Now these are connected. This is how those who tend to think of faith as this leap into the dark do understand something about faith. They don't understand everything, but they do understand one thing, and that is there are certain aspects of God and what He would have us to do that are beyond our intellect, and therefore we have to simply trust Him, though we don't understand. Now they go to an extreme in the sense that they make faith just this thing that you just do without really knowing why. I just believe. If you just believe, all things can happen if you just believe. They take away the object of belief, which is God, whose character and power are perfect, and therefore when He speaks, you can accept what He says as true and act upon it. So that leads to the second one. See, in the second one, the focus is on God Himself, His character, His power, perfect character, perfect power. Therefore, you can perfectly trust Him. Now, trust is the key word in all this, but we haven't yet reached the core of our discussion. Faith. It does involve a certain trust in what you cannot see or understand. But what you can see and understand, if you will, is the perfect character and power of God. And therefore you can hear what He says, accept it as true, and act upon it. But let's look at a story in the New Testament. I read this and it blew me away. I read this from a book about authentic Christianity. The author pointed something out in a story about Jesus. There was a woman who came to Jesus, a Gentile, a non-Jew, who wanted Jesus to heal her demon-possessed daughter, if you will. Jesus completely ignored her pleas, her cries, her begging. The apostles were aggravated and had Jesus tell her to go away. She won't stop yelling. This is me paraphrasing. So Jesus tells her He came for the children of Israel. It's not good to give to the dogs what should be given to the children. So at first He ignores her. Then He says He didn't come for her and her people, and that to give to her and her people would be like taking food from the children who are at the table and giving it to the dogs. So then she says, yeah, but even the dogs can eat the crumbs. So Jesus rewards her faith in Him and grants her petition. He speaks highly to her concerning her faith. Now, let's take the two things we just talked about. Was she making a blind leap right now? I mean, was her faith blind and objectless? Did she just believe in some objectless concept? No, her faith was very focused. It was in Jesus. He was the one that she placed her faith in, her trust in, her confidence in. But was it His word? Did she hear what He said, accepted it as true, and act upon it? Because at first He didn't say anything. He didn't say anything at first. He ignored her. So did she just leave? No. Then He says He didn't come for her and her people. And it wouldn't be good to give the food of the children to the dogs. Did she hear that, accept it as true, and just leave? No. No, she didn't. She kept on. So this doesn't fit either one of our definitions of faith. This kind of blind, objectless belief for belief's sake, nor this hearing what God says, because Jesus is God, the Son of God, God incarnate. Hearing what He says, accepting it as true, and then acting upon it. Now, it doesn't mean he was lying. No. The point I'm making is there was more to her faith, even from Jesus' perspective, than those two things. And now we get to the core of the discussion. What is it? Desperate dependence is how I would define it. Trust manifest in desperate dependence. She would not stop until he granted it. And it wasn't a kind of name it and claim it prosperity kind of thing. It was, I cannot make it unless you do this. Unless you do this for my daughter, we're not going to make it. See, that's what the essence of being a Christian or a believer is. Desperate dependence upon Christ. How so? Because without him, we're going to die and go to hell. Plain and simple, we desperately depend upon his death on our behalf, his resurrection on our behalf. It's a desperate need. Okay, it's a life and death situation. Now, when we understand that, then we move from the simply philosophical and theological to the absolutely practical. When we come to Christ, we must be desperately dependent upon him. Not just in the beginning when we realize if he does not save us, then we are unsaved. If he does not save our lives, then we are desperately hopeless. It's not just in the beginning, but it's for the rest of our lives. When we read the scriptures and we see the people of God, we see that they were constantly in a state of desperate dependence. What could Noah do to save himself and his family? Nothing. He was in desperate dependence upon God to give him the plan for the ark, because if God did not show him how to make that ark, he and his family would die with the rest of the world. Could Abraham bring about having a child when he was beyond the age of childbearing, and his wife is not only beyond the age of childbearing, but barren? Desperate dependence. Isaac, Jacob, the patriarchs. Desperate dependence. Moses and the Israelites. The Red Sea. Pharaoh behind them with his armies, the Red Sea in front of them. They were desperately dependent upon God to deliver them. If God did not come through for them, they were going to die. This is the life of faith. It is a life that without desperate dependence upon God, we will die. We won't make it. We won't be able to live our lives. And if our lives do not require this kind of desperate dependence upon God, then we're not living a true life of true faith and true trust. Meaning there should be something in our lives, as those who claim faith in Christ, that make it such that we cannot achieve a certain goal unless God himself comes through for us. And thus God gets the glory. When people ask, how did that happen? You say, God. And I've experienced that. I've experienced it in my life. And I am striving to live that kind of life. A life that is desperately dependent upon God. So that's what faith is. Faith is desperate dependence upon God. It is a trust that is desperately dependent. I pray that you who are listening may be living that kind of life. And as a result of that, you may experience God as being perfectly trustworthy. Jesus is Lord.